Welcome to the Dr. Kumar Discovery Podcast. I'm Dr. Ravi Kumar, a board-certified neurosurgeon and assistant professor at UNC. Today, we're diving into another episode of Tribulations, one that covers one of the most important medical advances of the past century, oral rehydration solution. Now, when I say oral rehydration solution, you might think, that sounds boring. Just salt and water. It's not glamorous like cancer vaccines or cutting-edge biotech. But few inventions in medicine have saved as many lives as this simple therapy. It's a treatment grounded in solid science, developed by passionate doctors working in desperate conditions, and later taught to mothers and communities around the world who weren't clinicians at all, but used this therapy to save millions of lives. And here's the best part. This isn't just a story about global health. Oral rehydration solution is something you can actually use in your own life. It's something that you should keep in your bag anytime you're traveling. And one day, it might come through for you when you need it most. We'll talk more about that at the end of this podcast. So before we get into the story, I want to give you a quick disclaimer. I'm a medical doctor, but I'm not your doctor. This show is for informational purposes only. And especially in this Tribulation series, the goal is storytelling and learning, not diagnosis or treatment. Nothing here is meant to replace professional medical advice or a consultation with your own physician. Also, this podcast is completely separate from my role as assistant professor at UNC. Okay, so let's get into the story. I want you to picture this: a refugee camp on the border of Bangladesh and India. Lanterns flicker in the humid night. Cots stretch as far as the eye can see, each holding a sick patient. The ground is slick from days of relentless diarrhea. We're in the middle of a cholera epidemic in the 1970s. The Indian government has mobilized as many IV saline supplies as it can, but the doctors and supplies simply can't keep up. Patients are arriving faster than they can be treated, dehydrating rapidly, and dying. At the time, the only therapy the medical community had was intravenous saline and antibiotics. If you could get it and there was enough to replace the fluids lost from cholera, then doctors could keep patients alive. But the IV solutions were running out, and the death rate in the camp climbed up to nearly 30%. A young Indian doctor named Dilip Mahalanabis knows that unless they can find another solution, countless more children and adults will die. He recalls reading about research suggesting that a simple mixture of salt and sugar in water could bypass the paralyzed absorption pathways in the gut caused by cholera. It might allow water to be absorbed back into the bloodstream even in the middle of severe diarrhea and vomiting. So he takes a tin bowl, scoops in some salt, and adds a paper cone of sugar, mixes it into clean water, and hands it to a young mother whose baby lies limp in her arms, nearly lifeless from dehydration. She carefully feeds the salty, sugary water to her child. Hours later, she returns. The baby is awake and alert. The sunken eyes are now bright. When Dr. Mahalanabis checks her pulse, he can tell the blood pressure has returned. The child's body was rehydrating. This was the first mass-scale use of oral rehydration solutions, courageously carried out by Dr. Mahalanabis and his colleagues during the 1970s cholera outbreak. But the discovery of oral rehydration solutions was not the work of one person. It was the product of a chain of insights, a global collaboration of researchers and doctors who built upon one another's ideas, ultimately creating one of the simplest and most life-saving therapies in the history of medicine. To see where oral rehydration solution was first conceived, we have to start with the work of Dr. Robert Crane. In 1960, Dr. Crane, a biochemist, discovered the concept of a co-transporter. This is a protein machine that sits in the membranes of the intestinal cells lining the gut. Instead of moving just one molecule at a time, these transporters can move two substances together. One molecule is needed for the other to pass through. So essentially, one molecule is the key to unlock entry for the other molecule. The transporter he described was the sodium-glucose co-transporter. When both glucose and sodium attach to it, the protein carries sodium and glucose into the intestinal cell. Wherever sodium goes, water follows, along with chloride. So sodium, glucose, chloride, and water are absorbed into the cell, and then another transporter pumps sodium back out into the bloodstream, pulling water and chloride along with it. That single mechanism, discovered by Dr. Robert Crane, would unlock the entire story of oral rehydration therapy. Around the same time, a U.S. Navy physician scientist named Robert Allen Phillips showed that deaths from cholera could be prevented by replacing the enormous fluid losses that occur from the watery diarrhea. He pioneered the idea of giving patients intravenous saline to keep them hydrated until the infection passed. Building on those ideas, two physician philanthropists, Dr. David Nalen and Dr. Richard Cash, began experimenting with an oral version of that therapy. In the late 1960s, they were working in East Pakistan, which later became Bangladesh, during a massive cholera epidemic. They had read Dr. Crane's work on the sodium glucose cotransporter and understood Dr. Phillips' approach to fluid replacement. They also knew that cholera, caused by the bacterium Vibrio cholerae, releases a toxin that disrupts the body's ability to retain chloride and bicarbonate. The toxin essentially opens a channel that allows these electrolytes to flow out into the intestinal lumen, and water rushes out after them, creating relentless watery diarrhea and severe dehydration. But the sodium glucose cotransporter, the one Dr. Crane described, is not affected by cholera toxin. The problem was that cholera patients often weren't eating or drinking, so they had no glucose and no sodium to drive the transporter. Nalen and Cash realized that if they could mix glucose and sodium in the right proportions, they could activate the unaffected transporter and pull water back into the body. And the proportions mattered. Too much sugar would actually worsen diarrhea by drawing water into the intestines, and too little would fail to drive absorption. After careful work, they created a solution with about 4.2 grams of sodium chloride, 4 grams of sodium bicarbonate, 20 grams of glucose, and a half a gram of potassium chloride in a liter of water. When they gave the solution to cholera patients, they found something remarkable. These patients required about 80% less intravenous fluid to recover. They stayed hydrated long enough for the infection to pass, and most survived. At the time in Bangladesh, IV fluids were scarce, and each patient could require several liters a day to keep them alive. The fact that this simple, inexpensive mixture could replace so much of that need was revolutionary and life-saving. With the paper by Nalen and Cash now published and circulating, we return to that refugee camp in 1971. That young Indian doctor, Dr. Dilip Mahalanabis, was trying to save the lives of countless children and adults suffering from cholera. At the time, a civil war was raging in Bangladesh. Tens of thousands of people were fleeing the region during the monsoon months, and the cholera epidemic followed. About 30% of those who caught cholera were dying, and resources were scarce. India mobilized as much medical support as it could, but it was nowhere near enough. The refugee camp in a small town on the border of India and Bangladesh called Bangaon held an estimated 350,000 people, with as many as 6,000 new refugees arriving every day. After witnessing the miraculous recovery of the baby given oral rehydration solution, Dr. Mahalanabis organized a supply line from Calcutta to Bangaon. In a small library in Calcutta, he set up a makeshift factory where workers filled plastic bags with measured amounts of glucose, salt, and baking soda. Each bag contained 22 grams of glucose, 3.5 grams of sodium chloride, and 2.5 grams of sodium bicarbonate, enough to make 1 liter of oral rehydration solution. The cost of each liter was only about 1.50 cents, and they produced enough packets to make 50,000 liters of solution. IV fluids were reserved for the most severe cases, but patients showing early signs of cholera were instructed to start drinking the oral solution immediately before dehydration became life-threatening. Each adult might consume up to 20 liters of the solution before recovering. Because potassium was unavailable, patients were also encouraged to drink the water from green coconuts, which naturally contain about 70 milliequivalents of potassium per liter. The situation remained dire. The wards were overcrowded, with cots filling every inch of space. Sometimes 2 adults or several children shared a single cot. All were suffering from relentless diarrhea that spilled out onto the red clay, creating a slick of cholera-ridden, mucousy stool. But the team pressed on, distributing the oral rehydration packets throughout the camp and the surrounding villages. When the epidemic finally subsided, the results were astonishing. The death rate had dropped from 30% to just 3.6%. Inside the camp's makeshift hospital under Dr. Mahalanabis' supervision, mortality fell to around 1%. It was a massive salvation of life and achieved through nothing more than a simple, salty, sugary solution. For the first time, there was real hope against the ancient scourge of cholera and other diarrheal diseases that had haunted humanity for millennia. Around that time, a nonprofit organization called the Bangladesh Rural Advancement Committee, or BRAC, began a remarkable mission. After witnessing the massive success and salvation of life in the refugee camp with Dr. Mahalanabis' oral rehydration solution, their goal was to give the power of oral rehydration to the people of Bangladesh themselves. They realized that the best way to spread this knowledge was through mothers. Mothers were selfless, determined, deeply invested in the well-being of their children. They had no egos and no hesitation when it came to learning new things that could save lives. The team at BRAC understood that these women were the true agents of change. So they launched a campaign across rural Bangladesh, teaching women how to make oral rehydration solution using simple household ingredients like salt, sugar, and clean water in the right proportions. They showed them how to give it to their children during bouts of diarrhea and how to keep them hydrated until the illness passed. This model of community-based education spread rapidly. It empowered families to take health into their own hands and saved countless lives. Death from dehydration, once a tragic part of everyday life, began to vanish from homes and villages across the country. The simplicity of the therapy, combined with scientific precision, made it one of the most effective medical interventions in history. In the early 1980s, diarrheal diseases killed an estimated 5 million children under 5 each year. Today, that number is closer to 444,000, a 91% decline. And across all ages, global diarrheal deaths have fallen about 60% since the 1990s. Scaling up oral rehydration therapy has been one of the biggest drivers of that drop, alongside zinc, vaccines, safer water, and sanitation. The Lancet later called oral rehydration solution one of the most important medical advances of the 20th century. And even though oral rehydration solution has saved countless lives around the world, what's amazing is that it's something that's useful to all of us. It's not just for cholera or hospitals in crisis. It's something that might actually get you out of a jam someday if you know about it. You can buy oral rehydration packets, usually labeled ORS, on Amazon or most drugstores. They're light, cheap, and easy to pack. Some are designed to pour straight into regular water bottles, and others make about a liter of solution. If you buy some, look for the ones that say WHO, UNICEF type. That's the standard research-backed formula used all over the world. There are fancy versions out there with flavoring or fancy labels, and those are fine, but the simple ones are the real deal. They're what you want to have in your bag when you're traveling internationally, camping, hiking, or anywhere far from medical care. To drive home how important it is to have these packets with you, let me tell you a personal story. A few years back, my 2 brothers, my 8-year-old son, and I went hiking in the Flat Tops area of Colorado. It's a wild place, a huge volcanic plateau high in the Rockies. To get to it, you have to first climb up to 12,000 feet, and then you drop down into this massive flat basin that sits about 10 or 11,000 feet above sea level. For my brothers and me, it was hard but doable. My son, though, he was only 8 years old, and that climb was just too much for his little body. Looking back, it was one of the biggest bonehead moves of my parenting life. I had taken him up there without being properly prepared. He started getting altitude sickness pretty much as soon as we hit 12,000 feet. We dropped down into that plateau, hoping he'd adjust, but after 2 nights, it was clear he was not getting better. We decided we needed to get him out of there. So we packed up and started hiking back, but he couldn't make it. His energy was gone. He was dizzy, nauseated, miserable. So we wrapped him up in a sleeping bag like a makeshift stretcher. My brothers and I started carrying him out. The cruel part was that to leave the flat tops, you actually have to climb even higher before you descend back down the mountain. Up until then, I had been doing okay. But with the added exertion and the altitude, it hit me too. The world started spinning. I got sick. I could barely stand. Suddenly, both of us, my son and me, were down. Now I'm panicking. I'm thinking, what have I done? I've put my son in danger. I can't carry him out. I can't even stand. One of my brothers took off up the ridge to find cell signal and to call for help. A helicopter eventually came in and landed in this little meadow. They loaded my son onto a stretcher, gave him oxygen, and flew him out to the nearest hospital. There wasn't room for me, so I had to watch the helicopter lift off with my little boy inside. A couple of rangers came in on foot to help us. One of them looked at me and said, "You don't look good, Doc. Drink this." She pulled out a small packet of oral rehydration salts, poured it into my water bottle, and told me to drink it. And I'm not exaggerating, within minutes, it was like life had been poured back into me. My head cleared, my vision steadied, my heart started to feel strong again. I could feel my body coming back to life. Within minutes, I was back on my feet. We hiked off that mountain super fast, got to the car, and drove straight to the hospital. I ran inside frantic, calling, "Where's my son? Where's my boy?" And the nurses just laughed and pointed to the corner. There he was, sitting on a cot, perfectly fine, playing video games on my brother's phone. My son had refused to get in the helicopter on the mountaintop, and my brother had bribed him by giving him his phone with a video game loaded up. He looked at me, smiled, and said, "Hey, Baba," then went right back to his game. So this is just one example of how oral rehydration solutions can get you out of a pinch. Whether it's diarrhea, nausea, food poisoning, altitude sickness, or dehydration from heavy exertion, rehydrating your body is the key. Hydration is literally the secret to keeping every biological process working right. Getting water back into your tissues might be exactly what you need in your toughest moment. But what if you don't have ORS packets and you're in a bad spot? Well, you can make it yourself with simple ingredients that you can find in almost any grocery store, small tienda, or even a gas station. Take 1 liter of clean water, add a half a teaspoon of table salt, and 6 level teaspoons of sugar. Mix it until everything dissolves, and that's it. Drink it throughout the day to thirst. Most people who are sick or dehydrated will end up drinking about 2 liters per day. If you're caring for a young child under 2 years old, try to give about 50 to 100 milliliters every time they have a loose stool or vomit. For children between 2 and 9 years old, give around 100 to 200 milliliters each time they have diarrhea or vomiting. For older children and adults, drink to thirst, usually up to 2 liters per day. If you're vomiting, take small sips. Even if you throw some of it up, enough will absorb between episodes to help your body rehydrate. And of course, if vomiting or diarrhea continues, or if you develop a fever, bloody stools, or signs that fluid intake is not keeping up, you need to see a doctor. ORS is an incredible tool, but it does not replace medical care when things are severe. Now, a lot of people say, well, I'll just drink Gatorade or some other sports drink. The problem is that sports drinks are not the same. They have too little sodium and too much sugar. They don't hydrate you nearly as effectively as a true oral rehydration solution. You can enjoy sports drinks if you want, but don't rely on them for serious dehydration. And it's important to note a few red flags that need immediate medical attention. These include lethargy or confusion, meaning changes in mental status, no urine output for 8 hours, blood in the stool, or vomiting so severe that you can't keep anything down. Infants under 6 months and anyone showing severe signs of dehydration need to see a doctor right away. Babies can lose fluid much faster than adults, and severe dehydration can turn dangerous very quickly. So, that's the story of oral rehydration solution, a creative, life-saving therapy born from science and human compassion. It has saved the lives of millions around the world and is something you can carry, use, and share to get yourself or someone else out of a tough spot. In our next episode, we're going to do a deep dive on a daily habit that might be your body's most powerful performance enhancer. It's not exercise, it's not diet, it's sleep. We'll dive deep into how sleep fine-tunes every system in your body, from your brain to your hormones, and explore the science-backed ways to repair and optimize it. So until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and stay healthy. Cheers.